My name is Jhon, and welcome to Plane Crashed, the channel where we dive deep into the skies to uncover the haunting mysteries behind aviation's most baffling disappearances. Tonight, we venture into the unknown, where radar screens blink out, distress calls fall silent, and entire aircraft vanish without a trace. These are not just stories of tragedy, but enigmas that defy explanation. From the roaring engines that suddenly fade into silence to the families left, clinging to questions that may never be answered, this is the chilling world of flights that disappeared and were never found. It was a quiet, humid night in Kuala Lumpur on March 8, 2014, when Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 prepared for takeoff. On board the gleaming Boeing 777 were 239 souls. Passengers, crew, families, friends and colleagues, all bound for Beijing on what was supposed to be an ordinary red-eye flight. The cabin lights glowed softly as passengers settled in, unaware that they were stepping into one of the most haunting mysteries in modern aviation history. Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, a seasoned pilot with over 18,000 flight hours, and his first officer, Farik Abdul Hamid, carried out their pre-flight checks with precision, their calm professionalism captured in the final radio communications before departure. At exactly 12:42 a.m., Flight MH370 lifted from the runway, its engines roaring into the dark sky, climbing steadily over the South China Sea as it began its 6-hour journey north. The weather was calm, the systems nominal, and air traffic controllers watched the blip of the Boeing glide smoothly across their radar screens. Nothing seemed unusual. Then at 1:19 a.m., as the aircraft approached the edge of Malaysian airspace and prepared to hand off communications to Vietnamese control, a voice came through the radio. It was calm and routine, the last known words ever heard from the cockpit. "Good night, Malaysian 370. Moments later, the transponder signal, the electronic heartbeat that tells air traffic control an aircraft's location and altitude, suddenly went dark. The plane vanished from civilian radar. There was no distress call, no sign of malfunction, no SOS, just silence. It was as if the aircraft had been erased from the sky. Within minutes, confusion spread through the control rooms. Calls went unanswered. Radar sweeps found nothing, and as the minutes stretched into hours, what began as a communication lapse transformed into a crisis that would soon grip the entire world. When Flight MH370 failed to arrive in Beijing at its scheduled time, panic rippled through Malaysia Airlines headquarters. Families waiting at the arrival gate stared helplessly at the information boards that switched from landed to delayed, and finally to contact lost. News broke like wildfire. A modern airliner had disappeared mid-flight, and nobody knew where it went. Search and rescue teams were dispatched to the South China Sea, the last known position of the plane. For days they scoured the waters, expecting to find debris, fuel slicks, or anything that might tell them what had happened. But the ocean remained eerily empty. No wreckage, no bodies, nothing. The disappearance made no sense. Commercial aircraft don't just vanish, especially not in the age of GPS and satellite tracking. Then came the first twist. Military radar data later revealed that after its transponder went dark, MH370 had not crashed into the South China Sea. Instead, it had turned sharply westward, crossed back over the Malaysian peninsula, and flown out over the Andaman Sea. The maneuver was deliberate and precise, suggesting that someone with advanced aviation knowledge was at the controls. From there, the aircraft followed a strange, meandering route before disappearing again, this time for good, into the vastness of the southern Indian Ocean. The revelation deepened the mystery and raised chilling questions. Who was flying the plane? And why? The disappearance of MH370 triggered one of the most extensive and expensive search operations in history. Dozens of countries joined forces, deploying aircraft, ships and submarines to comb the seas. The world watched as maps filled with grids of search zones expanded day after day, yet nothing emerged. It was the digital age's first great vanishing act. Analysts turned to satellite data from the British company Inmarsat, which had recorded faint handshakes between the aircraft and a communication satellite long after the plane went missing. By studying these pings, investigators calculated that the aircraft had continued flying for up to 7 hours after its last contact, heading steadily south until it likely ran out of fuel over one of the most remote places on Earth. The idea that the plane had kept flying for hours, silently and unseen, sent chills through even the most seasoned investigators. How could a massive jetliner, tracked by advanced global systems, simply disappear without anyone knowing? Theories began to swirl, each more unsettling than the last. Some experts suggested a sudden cabin depressurization might have rendered everyone unconscious, while the plane flew on autopilot until fuel exhaustion. Others believed it was a deliberate act, a pilot's suicide, a hijacking, or a calculated plan to make the aircraft vanish forever. The captain, Zaharie Ahmad Shah, came under intense scrutiny. Investigators examined his personal life, finances, and flight simulator. On that simulator, data logs revealed a chilling clue. A simulated flight path, eerily similar to MH370's final suspected route over the southern Indian Ocean. Was it a coincidence or a grim rehearsal? The official report couldn't conclude either way, leaving the possibility hanging like a shadow over his legacy. But there were counter-arguments too. Colleagues described him as professional and composed, a man devoted to his family and his job. If it wasn't him, then who or what took control of the aircraft? As months turned into years, hope began to fade. Until one morning in July 2015, more than 16 months after the disappearance, a piece of debris washed ashore on Réunion Island, thousands of miles from the original search area. It was a flaperon, a part of the plane's wing, and it was unmistakably from a Boeing 777. Testing confirmed it belonged to MH370. Finally, there was proof the plane had ended in the Indian Ocean, just as satellite data had suggested. Over the next few years, more fragments were found scattered along coastlines of Mozambique, Madagascar, and Tanzania, each battered by time and tide. But the main wreckage and the flight recorders that could reveal the plane's final moments remained hidden beneath the ocean's depths. Despite scanning more than 120,000 square kilometers of seafloor with advanced sonar, search teams found nothing. The seabed was mapped in extraordinary detail, but the plane itself was nowhere to be seen. It was as if the Indian Ocean had swallowed its secret whole. As the official search was suspended in 2018, the world was left with more questions than answers. How could a plane this large evade every radar, every signal, every trace of detection? Why did no one on board send a message, make a phone call, or activate an emergency beacon? The silence was unnerving. The more investigators uncovered, the more confusing the case became. Theories multiplied, some scientific, others conspiratorial. Some believed an onboard fire might have knocked out communications, forcing the pilots to turn back before being overcome by smoke. Others speculated about a possible cargo issue, a hijacking gone wrong, or even cyber sabotage. But the lack of concrete evidence allowed wilder ideas to flourish. A secret military shootdown, a government cover-up, even alien abduction. It became not just a mystery, but a cultural phenomenon, an event that blurred the lines between science and speculation. For the families of those aboard, the pain never faded. Each year brought new headlines, false hopes, and emotional exhaustion. Many felt betrayed by what they saw as incompetence and confusion among governments. Some refused to give up, forming groups and funding independent searches, clinging to the belief that one day the ocean would surrender its truth. In Beijing, Kuala Lumpur, and beyond, memorials stand as solemn reminders of those lost, names etched in stone, their fates unknown. The tragedy also transformed the aviation industry. MH370 exposed a shocking gap in global flight tracking systems. How could a plane disappear in an age when smartphones could locate a person within meters? In response, international aviation authorities introduced new safety measures, including real-time satellite tracking and more rigorous communication protocols. In its own silent way, MH370 changed aviation forever. Yet for all the technological advances and data analysis, one thing remains clear. No one truly knows what happened in those final hours. Did the passengers realize something was wrong as the plane turned back toward the west? Were they conscious as the aircraft glided south over the empty ocean? Did the pilots fight until the end, or was the cockpit already dark and empty? The answers lie somewhere on the ocean floor, sealed in the black boxes that may still be waiting, untouched, beneath layers of silt and time. The ocean is vast and merciless, and its depths hold secrets that may never surface. Still, the mystery endures, because humanity cannot bear the thought of not knowing. There's something haunting about an absence so complete, an entire plane, an entire group of lives erased, leaving behind only fragments and echoes. Every time a new piece of debris washes ashore, it reopens the wound, reminding the world that Flight MH370 is still out there somewhere, beyond the reach of light. More than a decade later, MH370 remains the symbol of modern uncertainty, a story that shattered our faith in technology and control. It reminds us that, even in an age of satellites and systems, the sky can still swallow a plane whole, leaving us to stare into the void, desperate for meaning. Somewhere beneath the waves, perhaps the fuselage lies intact, seats still bolted to the floor, silent evidence of the final moments. Perhaps the black boxes still whisper with data, waiting for discovery. Or perhaps the ocean has already erased it all, leaving only currents and memories. As night falls over the Indian Ocean, the waves move endlessly, indifferent to human loss. Above them, stars shimmer like navigation lights across eternity. And somewhere in that vast emptiness, the ghost of Flight MH370 still flies, a reminder that even the most advanced machines can vanish. And that sometimes the greatest mystery isn't how something was lost, but why it was never found. On December 5, 1945, the skies above Florida were calm, painted in soft winter light, as 5 U.S. Navy Avenger torpedo bombers prepared to take off from the Naval Air Station at Fort Lauderdale. It was supposed to be a routine training exercise, nothing more than a navigational drill over the warm Atlantic waters, a mission so ordinary that few paid it any attention. The group, known as Flight 19, consisted of 14 experienced airmen led by Lieutenant Charles C. Taylor, a veteran combat pilot who had flown missions over the Pacific during World War II. At 2:10 p.m., the Avengers rumbled down the runway one by one, their propellers slicing through the humid air as they lifted into the open blue. The flight plan was simple, a triangular route east over the sea, north for a set distance, and then back west to the base. The men were relaxed, chatting over the radios as their planes glided above the turquoise expanse of the Atlantic. Yet what began as a standard military exercise would soon become one of the greatest aviation mysteries in history. The day 6 aircraft vanished without a trace, spawning a legend that still endures nearly 80 years later. The first hour of the flight was uneventful, but around 3:30 p.m., radio transmissions from Lieutenant Taylor grew increasingly confused. His voice, usually confident and steady, carried an edge of uncertainty. "Both my compasses are out," he said. "I'm trying to find Fort Lauderdale, but everything looks strange. Even the ocean looks different." Ground control tried to guide him home, instructing him to fly west, but Taylor hesitated, convinced he was over the Florida Keys and not the Bahamas. His uncertainty began to spread to the other pilots in the formation. They followed his lead, circling and changing direction, their fuel slowly depleting. The weather began to worsen. Clouds gathered, winds picked up, and the once clear horizon faded into a dull grey haze. The radio chatter became frantic, filled with fragments of fear and confusion. "We can't tell where we are. Everything is wrong. It looks like we're entering white water." Then silence. Flight 19 had disappeared. When the planes failed to return to base by nightfall, search and rescue operations were launched immediately. The Navy dispatched a PBM Mariner rescue plane with 13 crew members to search the area where Flight 19 was last heard from. But within 20 minutes of takeoff, the rescue plane itself vanished from radar, its last known position somewhere off the Florida coast. Witnesses later reported seeing a fireball in the sky, suggesting the Mariner may have exploded mid-air due to a fuel leak, but no wreckage was ever recovered. By morning, 6 aircraft and 27 men were missing. The search that followed was massive. Over 300 aircraft, dozens of ships, and countless personnel scoured more than 300,000 square miles of ocean. The waters of the Atlantic were combed for days, but there were no oil slicks, no debris, no bodies, nothing. It was as if the sea had swallowed them whole. Reporters quickly seized on the story, dubbing it the Lost Patrol. Newspapers across the country published haunting accounts of the missing flight, capturing the public's imagination and fear. How could an entire squadron of planes vanish in broad daylight so close to home? The military launched an extensive investigation, examining every possible explanation: mechanical failure, navigational error, weather anomalies. But the final report only deepened the mystery. The official conclusion read, "Cause unknown." That phrase, so simple and final, became the seed of a legend. In the years that followed, the disappearance of Flight 19 became forever tied to a stretch of ocean that would soon be known worldwide as the Bermuda Triangle, a mysterious zone where ships and planes were said to vanish under bizarre and unexplained circumstances. Authors and theorists claimed that the area was plagued by magnetic disturbances that could disable compasses, strange weather phenomena, or even portals to other dimensions. Some suggested the pilots had flown through a time warp, or that extraterrestrial forces had taken them. While these ideas stretched far beyond scientific reasoning, the lack of concrete evidence made anything seem possible. Flight 19 became the cornerstone of an enduring mystery, a story that blurred the line between fact and legend. Still, beyond the myths, the reality was no less haunting. The final radio transmissions from Lieutenant Taylor paint a vivid picture of men caught in disorientation and panic, their instruments failing as daylight faded. "We can't make out anything. We think we must be about 225 miles northeast of base. It looks like we are over the Gulf, but we're not sure." His voice, once steady, had given way to confusion, and by the final moments exhaustion and fear had taken hold. "All planes close up tight. We'll have to ditch unless landfall. When the first plane drops below 10 gallons, we all go down together." Those were among the last words ever heard from Flight 19, somewhere in the darkening skies. With waves crashing below and fuel running out, 5 planes descended into oblivion. The ocean gave no hint of what happened next. Some experts later theorized that Taylor's compasses had malfunctioned due to magnetic interference, causing him to misjudge his position and fly the group farther out to sea. If true, the Avengers would have eventually run out of fuel and ditched in rough waters. But even that scenario couldn't explain the total lack of wreckage. The Avenger bombers were large, heavy machines built of metal that should have left traces, floating debris, oil, or bodies. Yet the ocean remained silent. The Mariner rescue plane's disappearance only compounded the mystery. Some argued it exploded mid-air due to volatile fuel, as eyewitnesses reported, but again, no debris was ever recovered. It was as if the Atlantic itself had decided to keep its secrets. The case of Flight 19 remains one of the most perplexing disappearances in aviation history. Unlike other crashes where mechanical failure or weather could be pinpointed, this event defied logic. It happened close to land, in daylight, with experienced pilots and within communication range. Every rational explanation seemed to collapse under scrutiny. Some researchers have suggested that Taylor's fatigue or disorientation played a larger role than anyone realized, as he had flown from Miami earlier that day and reportedly wasn't familiar with the area. His belief that he was flying over the Florida Keys instead of the Bahamas may have led the entire formation fatally astray. Others point to sudden squalls and waves that could have swallowed the aircraft within minutes after ditching. In the 1980s and 1990s, various expeditions tried to locate the wrecks of Flight 19 using sonar and underwater cameras, but none succeeded. The Atlantic's shifting sands and deep currents may have buried the planes forever. Yet the absence of evidence only added to the legend's power. The story of Flight 19 transcended military archives and entered popular culture, inspiring books, documentaries, and films. Perhaps the most famous depiction appeared in Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where the lost Avengers mysteriously reappear in the desert, perfectly intact, a nod to the enduring fascination and eerie allure of the mystery. The Bermuda Triangle itself became a cultural phenomenon, a place where rational science met human imagination, where the ocean seemed alive with secrets. But beyond all the speculation and myth-making, there's a deeper, more human tragedy at the heart of the Flight 19 story. 27 men went into the sky that day and never came back. Their families waited for word that never came, clinging to hope even as days turned into weeks. Wives, parents, and children gathered around radios, praying for survivors. When the Navy finally called off the search, all that remained were empty skies and unanswered questions. In the decades since, the ocean where Flight 19 vanished has changed little. Ships still pass through, waves still rise and fall, and somewhere beneath that vast expanse, the remains of 5 torpedo bombers may still rest, silent and corroded, hidden by time. The coordinates may be lost, but the story endures, a reminder of how thin the line is between certainty and mystery. Flight 19 wasn't just an accident. It was the birth of a myth that continues to haunt the imagination. It reminds us how vulnerable even the most skilled pilots can be when faced with the unpredictable power of nature. It reveals how, even in an age of technology and discipline, the sea can still devour its secrets without a trace. And it shows how quickly confusion can spiral into catastrophe when direction is lost. To this day, no wreckage has been conclusively identified as belonging to Flight 19. The search continues in sporadic bursts, fueled by curiosity, obsession, and the need to understand what really happened on that strange December afternoon. But perhaps the truth lies not in the science or the ocean itself. Somewhere beneath the waves, amid coral and shifting sand, lie the remains of 5 aircraft and the echoes of voices that once called across the static. Their story is carved not into stone or memory, but into the endless expanse of water that swallowed them whole. The disappearance of Flight 19 remains a ghost story written in clouds and sea spray, a reminder that even in the age of radar and reason, the sky can still betray us, and that sometimes the greatest mysteries are the ones that refuse to be solved. The sky has always been a symbol of freedom, of discovery, of humanity's desire to conquer the unknown. But for every story of triumph written among the clouds, there are others that end in silence and mystery. The disappearances of planes like MH370 and Flight 19 remind us that even with all our technology, there are places the human eye still cannot see, and truths that time refuses to reveal. Each vanished aircraft carries not only its passengers and crew, but also the unanswered questions that haunt the edges of the sky. Somewhere beyond the radar, beyond the reach of rescue and reason, the ghosts of these flights still drift in the endless expanse, silent, unseen, and unforgettable.